Hello, and welcome to You Don't Get It, a show where we hear about things we don't get. Today I have with me Mark Eaton. Why don't you tell me a little bit about location and it being somewhat of a character? And
Sure, yeah.
what is that?
One of the ways that you reveal characters through their interaction with other characters, and you're always kind of looking for the conflict. You know, if character A is in a room with character B, are they going to have conflict somewhere? And because drama thrives on conflict, they have to butt heads about something. And it's good to look at a location as a kind of a character because one of the first things they teach you in scene class is that when you're entering a room, the first conflict you're likely to have is with the room itself, especially if you've never been there before. So you're walking into a job interview or something, and it's intimidating. There's the desk and there's the person, and they've got the sheet of paper in front of them, and they're asking you questions. And so, please tell me about yourself, that kind of thing. It can be very intimidating.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, the room itself is antagonistic towards you, and because everything looks, it could be a perfectly normal setting, but to you it's strange and new and familiar, and you've got to be on your best behavior. And if you can't relax into that atmosphere, then it's all going to begin to kind of gang up on you after a while. So, and thinking of that office as a kind of character, it's going to be kind of an amalgam of some different things. Who built it, for one thing? Is it an old office? Was it built in the last century? Sometime is it pre-1950s or something like that? Is the air conditioning really bad? Is there lots of old wood around? Is there a radiator in the corner? That kind of thing. That, in a sense, the room has a lot of personality. Or the fact that it may be devoid of personality. Maybe it's all smooth lines and sharp corners and things like that. Even that's a kind of personality, because we've kind of met people who are somewhat blank and have a lot of hard surfaces and sharp corners, and you have to treat them a certain way. And I think if you relate to a room that way, and this is going to sound a little weird, but a room can have a personality, and interacting with that personality, especially if you don't mess with it especially if you don't mesh with it very well, can help or hurt. So anyway, it can be very interesting.
Yeah.
There's a tip for dealing with that too, by the way. If you walk into a room, and this works really well with job interviews, if you can make some slight change to that room, then in a sense you kind of own that little piece of it. So if I walk in, and I sit down in the chair, and then I move the chair just like an inch this way, or so, the environment is now changed because I was a part of it, and the chair is no longer where it was because I sat down in it. In a sense, I kind of own that little spot there. So now I've got a power base to operate from. So it's totally goofy, but it absolutely works. So you can use that. Feeling out of place, shift the chair, move the pen, move your foot, kick something.
So you could utilize that for when you're coming up with that, figuring out what the character is going to do in there. That can influence how they would respond to this.
Yeah, if you have a character who's intimidated by the space they're in, how do they respond to that? So if their response is to come bulldozing in and just take charge and take over the space like a bull in a china shop, then that's one kind of personality. That's one choice that they make. This is how I deal with intimidation. If they meet an intimidating character later, then that's probably how they're going to deal with them. Most likely, they might not. Or if they're very meek and very timid, they may not want to make waves at all. They may want to just kind of, very meekly come in and sit down and look around and not disturb anybody, not bother anybody, except they have this one little question, Or they may be one of these really happy people that just doesn't affect them at all. It may be intimidating, but they never know it. They're just ready to make friends with anybody. And, they may walk up to a mobster and be the same way and get along just fine. So...
Now I'm picturing all these movies that the character is oblivious to the area. They're just focused on the thing that they're there to do.
Right. So, yep. So location, if you think about, what a character is and how you put a character together and everything, they have a background of some kind. So the building is going to have a background, or whatever the location is, they've got to have some kind of a background. And if you think about a person's genetics, what kind of material were they given from the gene pool, as it were, and then how did the environment that they grew up in kind of affect how they interacted with that? So if you think about, imagine if you'd been born 500 years ago, in what would it be, 15, 16, something like that. But if you'd been brought up in Elizabethan England, I guess it wouldn't be Elizabethan, it'd be earlier than that. But anyway, if you've been brought up in England at that point, how would you be like you the way you are right now, and how would you be different? How much of you has been shaped by the environment around you, and how much of you just comes from you being an individual? So, if you happen to like spicy food, what would the range of options have been, and what would you have a taste for if you'd been back there? Or, if you like more flamboyant kind of clothing, if you like to stand out in a crowd, well, there again, what were the range of options back then, and what might you have gravitated towards? So
Sure.
that can be a fun little game to play. So.
That technology would be an interesting thing to try to...
Oh, sure, yeah. Yeah, how would you, if you're more technically minded, what kind of stuff might you have been messing with? Would you have gravitated towards a printing press, for example, and just been fascinated by that whole process, or, I don't know, something involving a water wheel, I don't know. So, but anyway, you look at yourself, or sorry, you look at the makeup, well, how the space was made or created, and even if it's like a natural setting, like a forest glen or a mountainside or something like that. If you imagine, say, God creating that particular space, and you think, well, he's in a creative mood. I wonder what he had in mind when he designed this. This little barrier reef over here. What kind of complexity was in his mind, to put all this together? And then what has the environment done over the years? If you're in a forest, for example, had people come along and cut the trees with their hatchets just because they knew they were supposed to bring a hatchet on a camping trip, and so they go whack, whack, whack as they go along. Just like, why would you do that? Maybe a storm has come through, maybe a flood has come through. How has the world not been kind, or how's the world left its mark? I should ask. If you if it's man-made, it's going to be a lot more deliberate, I think. Let's imagine a little red schoolhouse, for example, it was built in, I guess, 1916 now. Having to do a lot of math today. Built back then, it was built to be a schoolhouse. Mm-hmm. And so for years and years and years, it housed little kids, and it served as a kind of a hostess, and it served as a kind of a teacher's aide, if you will, to these children. And really, by putting it in those terms, the schoolhouse takes on a lot more of a character, so to speak. And then in the 1960s, they turned it into a Grange Hall, because it couldn't be a school anymore. And so she still gets to interact with her kids, but now they're grown up, and they're about grown-up business, and so it's going to be a little bit different. And then it becomes like a storage barn type of thing, and the kids still come by, but, they don't really have time for her. They're either going to drop something off, or they're going to pick something up. They're not really, they might have a few conversations there, but they're not really going to spend a lot of time there because, it's an old building. And then maybe it's, the roof starts leaking, and this time they just don't fix it, and it starts getting dilapidated, and then they stop using it altogether, and now nobody comes by because they're a little afraid of it. That to me just screams character of some kind. So how would you create a moment around this building where you could have an elderly couple strolling up to it, and, maybe they remember going there as young kids, and maybe, he kissed her under the eaves or something like that, or they swung together under the tree that's no longer there, but she's still there. So they stop to get a picture of themselves, with the schoolhouse because she's worth remembering. If that just doesn't scream character, then I don't know what does. So.
Well, that's really fascinating.
Anyway, it can be fun.
Well, I definitely learned something.
There you go. So now you know.
Now I know.
You do.
And hopefully you know.
Hopefully you do.
Thanks for joining us.